Look, it's not that complicated. People, when they own guns, submit to a background check. Somebody owns fireworks in excess of even any amount. Fireworks can be considered weapons, and so there should be some kind of notice to the state, like, hey, there should be a threshold that the experts understand to be in excess, and then they go say to the owners of these things, hey, this poses a risk to yourself and the community.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So a house exploded on Whidbey Island. Whidbey Island, we live here in Washington, and Whidbey Island is the largest island in Washington. It's got State Route 525. It goes up it, and it's a two-lane road. On the bottom, they have Clinton, and in the middle, more toward the north, Coopville, and at the top, Oak Harbor. And I don't know where on Whidbey Island this happened, but NBC reported that a house exploded, and it was because, they believe, a cigarette ignited 700 pounds of fireworks. So, should smoking in one's own home be illegal? Probably. No, Mike shakes his head. Yeah. No, I don't think so either.
So
Yeah.
this is one of those things where you can't limit people's freedom so much, right? Like a person's home is their sanctuary, and there's already those laws about not smoking within a certain distance of restaurants and stores and in public in general. But some people do have the option in their life to smoke cigarettes. It's a whole thing related to their freedom to make choices about their own habits and life. And limiting their freedom to such a degree would be, I think, too extreme, right? That it would affect people's quality of life to say they couldn't smoke in their own home, because then where could they smoke? Like designated smoking spots that are only allowed in certain areas. It would just, I think it would be too much of an imposition on people. There has to be a line, and usually the line for most things is one's own home, right? That as long as they're not smoking, I don't know, 1,000 cigarettes and just like blowing the smoke in every direction or something, right? Yeah, no. My answer to that is people should be allowed to smoke cigarettes in their own home. That's
Yeah. Yeah, like I went to, so I don't smoke, fortunately, but I did go to Las Vegas, and people smoked everywhere, and I thought, oh, that's weird. But also, it was, oh, they can do that here, and there's gambling here, and I guess it made sense for the place. Like, I approve of, in Washington, the public smoking bans that we have, but, like, that has been an imposition on them in the last, I don't know, 20 some odd years. And further impositions, probably not a good idea. So if it wasn't the spark that's the issue, it was the fuse. 700 pounds of fireworks in your house? This seems pretty excessive to me. I think that some line must have been crossed here. Like, fireworks are dangerous, and just having them in a home is a danger to the homes around it. But where should the line be drawn exactly? Where would you draw the line?
so. I would argue that if the cigarette was lit and they knew that there were fireworks were there, then it was wholly irresponsible of the homeowner to throw a lit cigarette anywhere near them, right? That the spark does matter in this particular circumstance. That if that is the case, allegedly, then there's two issues here. One is irresponsible storage of the fireworks. Why is there even the possibility of throwing something that could ignite them anywhere near them, right? Why aren't they locked away or stored safely? That's a big question. And then two, the line obviously is, are they stored safely? Because look, for almost anything, people can own plenty of stuff, but you still have to be a responsible owner of stuff, right? So theoretically, people can own any number of things that could be problematic, but if you're storing them safely or you're being responsible, you reduce the risk of things happening. In this circumstance, there are questions that need to be asked. Was this person like a vendor or something? Why were they storing it in their home? Could they have been storing it in a storage facility or a warehouse? That is an awful lot of fireworks. And so the question there to be raised is why? Always. It's always why is something that's unusual. Yeah, unusual is a good word. That's beyond the average you would expect for something like this. Why is that happening? Is there a big 4th of July celebration planned? Do they have it for holidays and celebrations? What's the deal? And so that I think definitely needs to be asked, and answers should probably be found through an investigation, clearly, because it posed a danger to not just their own home, which is bad, but also to the other homes in the surrounding area, which is also really bad, right? Because it poses a risk to the community. And this is one of those things where you see all these stories every so often of just really terrible things happening. And it always comes down to enforcement or regulation or something where somebody was able to get just way more of something than is actually safe to have,
Yeah.
and then nobody really knows about it except for them. And the question becomes why? How does that happen? Did they make these purchases all in one go? Did they add a little bit at a time? Right? What was going on that they were able to accumulate so much of it with nobody really knowing? Because this seems definitely in excess of what one would expect for one's own personal use. That's the question that I thought of immediately when I heard this story. Is like, why do they have just a huge amount of fireworks? What's going on?
Yeah, the way that I see it breaking down is that there are various things that can be regulated in this case. The purchase of fireworks could be regulated. The sale of fireworks is regulated. So regulating on behalf of the purchaser versus whoever sells it. The possession could be regulated. That might be difficult. I'm saying that might be difficult. But the use of fireworks could also be regulated. From my experience, that also would be kind of difficult. And because of just the number of booms I hear on celebratory days. It's like, how is enforcement going to be in all those places? They're not going to be. Not unless we give them powers we don't want them to have, is my initial thinking. You're isolating danger of smoking nearby. That seems smart, yeah. And you're saying there's too much in one location, so I guess the storage could be a little bit different than the possession, but in both those cases, that's somebody's home. So where's the enforcement there? Maybe I'm getting a little bit too much in the weeds here, but I see it as the easiest thing to do, or the thing to do which might not be the most fair, but might be constrainable via the resources, would be to regulate the production, or not the, I guess the production is in there too, but we're not going to end up with that, but the purchase or sale.
Look, it's not that complicated. People, when they own guns, usually have to register as gun owners. They have to submit to a background check. It's the same kind of deal here. If somebody owns fireworks in excess of a certain amount, or even any amount, fireworks can be considered weapons, and so there should be some kind of, at least notice or notification to the state, like, hey, this exists here, and then there should be a threshold. There should be some amount that the experts understand to be in excess of a safe amount to store in any one location, and that should trigger some kind of, flag or alarm or something, and then they go say to the owners of these things, hey, this poses a risk to yourself and the community. So the way I actually look at it is similar to housing codes. So houses have codes they have to abide by in order to be safe domiciles. So if you have a fence, it has to be a certain height, certain material. If you have certain things related to like fire safety, houses have to be built in a certain way to withstand any number of disasters. There's a whole list of things based on jurisdictions that are related to housing codes that there are theoretically like regulators and inspections for, theoretically. Obviously, we've seen in some of these stories that there aren't enough inspections of things because bad things happen, right? Things that in theory could have been prevented had there been sufficient enforcement or regulation of certain things. In this case, fireworks is the big one. That fireworks are a type of explosive. Explosives are, in other contexts, highly regulated, right? Extremely regulated. Firework people who do firework shows, they're subject to significant amounts of regulation and enforcement. They are, absolutely. I don't know. When I think of a story like this, do you remember when there was that huge explosion in Beirut in Lebanon? The where
Yeah, I don't remember when, but it was a big one. Yeah.
It was a few years back, and everybody was just super confused. Why did this happen? It was because the warehouse that they were storing like a whole bunch of different things that could all go kaboom all at once without any. I'm sure there was some regulation, but clearly not enough, right? Because it went kaboom in a big major city, and so it's one of those things, right? It's always just there's always this tension between freedom and regulation, and of course we live in a society, right? We live with this social contract that says that
Yeah.
everybody will abide by the rules and the laws. But in many cases, it's a bit of an honor system, right? It's
Yeah.
a degree of trust. And clearly, people make really serious mistakes or not mistakes that, again, this is one of those things where there are certain questions that need to be asked. Why was it so much, right? Was this part of like a black market? Were they selling on the side? The question is,
Mhm.
why would you have so many fireworks that are far in excess of what one would expect for just like a celebration or a holiday or something like that, where people just light off fireworks and go, ah, look at the fireworks, right? Like
Yeah.
that sounded like a lot. 700 pounds sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that the person whose house it was did something irregulatory, or else the explosion wouldn't have happened. I'm trying to think of it in terms of like what's the missing element here that generated this circumstance? Is it personal irresponsibility? We kind of see personal irresponsibility everywhere. In my own anecdotal judgment, it appears to me that people are speeding more than ever. Just a number of cars I see going fast. There certainly are cars speeding. So in terms of a comparative, and I don't just mean like 70 and a 60, 120 or something. Gross and awful rates of speed.
If you're talking about speeding, the story that caught my eye was the Tesla driver that was accused of being asleep and had their
Oh,
Tesla
geez.
in the Mad Max mode. So their car was speeding 78 miles on a 60, and they got pulled over.
There's Mad Max mode.
Apparently,
Oh.
I've never heard of it, but that's what I was reading in the news. But that caught my eye just because that type of technology isn't going away. The self-driving capability of cars. Clearly, they got caught, so the system is working,
Yeah.
right, in terms of catching them after the fact. But the fact that it even happened is problematic, that there's no system in place within these cars to prevent that from happening, that a driver who's supposed to be a responsible driver has to be awake. There's no circumstance, as far as I know, that drivers can actually fall asleep even with self-driving capabilities or AI or any of that. The driver has to be physically awake at all times. That's the
Yeah.
responsibility. Because remember, driving's a privilege. It's not a right. It's something that we allow each other to do, but with certain conditions. And in this case, that condition was not met, right? Because if the person's asleep and the self-driving technology causes catastrophic damage,
Yeah.
both are responsible, right? The self-driving technology, but also the driver, who has at all times a responsibility to pay attention on the road, right? Period. You
Yeah.
cannot fall asleep while driving, right? Because things can
Yeah.
go wrong. This is the same kind of thing with planes. So planes have autopilot, right? They have the ability to fly on their own, right? They've even
Yeah.
got a technology it was pretty neat when I read about it, where they managed to land a plane with autopilot, right? Without a pilot, which is great for emergencies, right? That's actually really good if they can remotely land a plane if needed. If both pilots have some kind of medical emergency, like they both have simultaneous
Yes.
heart attacks or something. But there's a reason you usually have two pilots on planes. There's usually a reason they have to be awake. There's any number of things, right? There's all these requirements that are in place for safety, right? But anyways, the same kind of deal applies here for fireworks. People can own things, but that doesn't mean that they can do whatever they want with those things. That they have to still be responsible owners of the things they have, right? That there's no unlimited freedom in any
Right.
society that I know of. If you're talking about anarchy, maybe, right? Like places in the world where there is no government, okay, people, they'll do whatever they want and face the consequences of their irresponsibility. But when you're talking about a society that has laws and rules, some of it's self-regulating, right? But some of it's not. And in this case, it really seems like it's not something that it's an amount that seems like it should have raised some flags somewhere.
Yes.
It's a question of how or why they were able to evade that.
So, if I could sum up what we've talked about so far, kind of sounds like I'm complaining that I've seen things and heard things that I know to be both illegal and dangerous, and those things have happened. And what you're replying with is there are laws and there are systems in place, and more can be done, but what I might not be seeing is the enforcement. I would extrapolate a little further and say that this is just a general feeling I have where a lot of issues seem to be a little bit newer than they were before. For example, somebody pilfers my car and I lock my car, and then one time I forget, and then somebody pilfers it again, and I'm just thinking, is the social trust really there? How can it be repaired? What can be done in the meantime? But maybe it's not as bad as I think, because there are, of course, regulations in place. Maybe we just gotta enforce them better or have them take better effect. Have I summarized this sort of meta discussion in a way which is true to what you have been saying?
Yeah, so at least for what you're talking about of seeing people or hearing, I hear them too sometimes on New Year's or other events.
Sure.
It's just a question there of enforcement, but also there's a question of whether those are actually allowed. It depends, because this is one of those things where it depends really on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction case. Because when we're talking about something like Washington State, there's some Native American reservations that allow the use of fireworks
Yeah.
within reason, obviously, but they allow it much in a much broader way than other places do. And so you may ask, why do the fireworks get sold, for instance, at these vendor stands or whatever it is? It could very well be the case that people are buying fireworks to then use them at the areas they're allowed to use them. So on the Native American reservations, for instance. And so that's one of those tricky things where it's like, if they're not technically using them in a place that they're not allowed to, but they're allowed to own them in a place that they're allowed to, then on the fence for that in terms of what are the limits really on how much one person can own without
Right.
using them. And that's where it gets really,
Murky.
yeah, that's where there's a sort of gray area right now in the law, is because somebody could have a huge amount of any number. I'm not going to get it too much down the rabbit hole. There you go, of some of the issues, because somebody could have an exorbitant. I'll give one example. They can have an exorbitant amount of sugar if they're a baker, right? If they bake cookies or
Yes.
bread or something or pastries, anything in excess can raise flags, but there could be legitimate reasons to have something. And so that's always why there's always this tension between freedom and public safety and how much is too much. And clearly in this case, it wasn't too much until it was, if the allegation is true, that a lit cigarette ignited a huge amount of fireworks, right? Like up until that point, nothing happened, but then something happened. So it's one of those things where, because remember,
Sure.
arson is a crime, right? So
Yeah.
if that was intentional, crime. If it was unintentional, accident, right? That's one of those things where who knows, right? We don't know if there was some other person who walked up with a lit cigarette,
Yeah.
and threw it onto this fire. We don't know. All we know is the after effects, the story itself, but we don't actually know if it was the homeowner, if it was a guest, if it was some random stranger walked along, saw a giant pile of fireworks, and it's like, cigarette. We don't know. That's the whole issue here, is that's why you do need investigation, why you do need to actually get to the facts of what happened to understand if it can be prevented in the future, right? Obviously, it can be prevented in the future in at least one way, which is don't store 700 pounds of fireworks right next to each other, right? If you're going to have it, store it in 30 different places or something. Like so they're not all right in the same pile.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
about all I have to say. Like here's another thing. It could be something else, right? It could be an electrical fire, lightning strike, right? Like there's other things that could happen that don't involve people, right? Who knows? If you're talking about looking for people to blame for fires, there's that Palisades fire trial going on down in California where they're trying to put the guy in jail for quite some time, who's being accused of, if my understanding of it is, allegedly it was out of revenge for something, for having lived in a place but no longer being able to live there. So it was like revenge against society for the personal failure, not personal failure, but the downturn in economic fortunes of this individual, such that they no longer could live in a place and were taking it. That's the allegations, my understanding. But that's one of those things where that you need investigation, you need to really study what happened and to gain some understanding of it. But yeah, that's all I have really to say on this one. If you wanted to talk about the other story.
Oh, the Ohio one. Yeah, no. So here's one of my criticisms of the news: is they'll report on one house explosion, for example, and then they'll blip over a different house explosion that happened for different reasons in a different state, but they're both house explosions, and they both happen in the same very large country, very far away from each other. I had one more question pertaining to the Washington thing, which maybe I didn't make clear. I just ambled around it. And then we can talk about the Ohio one. So it sounds to me like there are systems in place where there are regulations, and in this case, the regulation wasn't followed, and we don't really know that it was a cigarette, etc. But what about the fact, let's put it this way, and this, okay, so they sell fireworks on reservations, and they can be used on reservations. I have no problem with that, except in the fact that they are then used in places where they're not allowed to be used. If we took an extreme example here, it's like, you can buy firearms on this reservation and you can use them over there, but they ended up in another jurisdiction, I would think to myself, does there need to be some sort of concord here? Does there need to be some sort of, we all come together and say, how are we going to deal with this society-wide issue, and maybe you help us out, please? I would say that if that was firearms, but have we just not reached that level with fireworks? Is it really?
Oh, no. The federal government has. If you look down at the Texas case that just happened where they gave the huge sentences to the protesters, one of the charges was that fireworks were being used as a weapon.
Oh.
And that they added on to the charges to those protesters. Those sentences were very high, 100 years, 50 years, 30 years. And so one of the things, look, I watched the movie One Battle After Another, and one of the opening scenes heavily involves the use of fireworks. At least in fiction, it's understood that these can be viewed as weapons, but also in reality. Look, if you listen to the story, they also included that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is investigating, which tells me that's part of the thing, right? That maybe this was an excess of the allowed amount for fireworks. But so to your question, is there something that can be done? That is more enforcement, more regulation, right? Somebody can purchase a huge amount of something in like a Native American reservation or even elsewhere, right? Even through vendors or whatever. But there still has to be enforcement of it, right? Like, you're right. It's about the idea of there's still regulation of the traffic of firearms, of the movement of firearms from one place to another. Same kind of deal here, right? Like, there has to be some level of, why didn't they know that there was this much of a dangerous material in this place? It reminds me, honestly, of some of the issues that happened with that, the pulp mill implosion, the giant tank full of chemicals.
In Longview, yep.
They knew. If you read the news articles of the sort of saga of the timeline of events, they already had a leak. They already had a smaller level leak. They already had an incident in which somebody got seriously injured. And so the question I then have is, were the fines or the regulations or whatever just simply not enough to incentivize the company to actually fix things in a meaningful way? What was going on there? Same kind of deal here. Say there are regulations or there is enforcement. How sufficient is the enforcement to actually deter this kind of thing, right? Is it a fine? Is it a ticket? Is it the threat of jail time? Like, is there any actual amount of deterrence there that would incentivize people to not store a huge amount of fireworks in one location and then be so irresponsible as to throw a lit cigarette anywhere near that? Right? What precisely led to that sequence of events that people thought they could have that much explosive material right next to each other. That's obviously it's all alleged, right? There could have been something else. But the question always is, how does it end up there? And it comes down to that there's simply not enough enforcement or there's not enough information available. And the enforcement would happen either the time of purchase, because you have a receipt, or it would happen after the fact when it's moving, right? So even though
the transport, you could regulate the transport.
Interstate commerce, right? Because Native American reservations are considered like sovereign within the United States, but outside of them, you're not allowed to have things of a certain amount. So you could obviously have checkpoints, or it's like it's the same kind of deal with customs, right? You make sure that people aren't bringing dangerous stuff into the country with customs and border enforcement. Same kind of deal here, right? If somebody can buy an amount of fireworks in excess of what's allowed of anyone, make sure they don't bring it out of the place that they can use them to the place they can't, right? Like, it's one of those things. It's not that complicated. But
right.
And you can end up knowing like how much people are purchasing at a given time. We definitely have the technology for that.
This is one of those questions, right? 700 pounds is a lot. You would need like a truck or a van or something capable of carrying that much stuff.
Or very many trips, yeah.
Or very many trips, right? Which at any point should have raised any number of flags.
So do you want to talk about the Ohio one?
But that one's way different, right?
That's way different. This is just a different story. Yeah, it was an explosion.
It was an explosion. My understanding from listening to the report about that is it was an explosion caused by a utility crew, right? Not a homeowner, cutting into a gas line that they didn't know was there or something, and then bad things happened. But that's way, way different. That's what sounds a lot like a mistake. They either knew it was there but didn't know it was right there, or that somebody really messed up, right? That they should have known it was there. And this is one of those things that's super complicated, because it could be that one hand of the government isn't talking to the other, that they have it listed somewhere, but they didn't have the actual information. And that's the question for my mind is, was this crew like government employees? Were they subcontracted, right? Were they hired out by some other group and some kind of bidding process where they didn't have access to the information? What was going on that this happened where they're cutting it? Because that occasionally does happen, right? Where crews cut into underground electrical lines or gas lines. It happens, right? We've got a very complex infrastructure, and the more dense the area, the greater the number of things, right? Internet cables, electric cables, water, gas. The question there just becomes like, whatever they were doing, did they know ahead of time that it was there? If they did, somebody really messed up. If they didn't, why didn't they know? And that's a way different conversation than what happened in Whidbey Island. Because in Whidbey Island, the allegation is that it was the homeowner or somebody there.
Yeah.
This one is like a government entity. A utility crew would be like a city or a state or the federal government crew, right? Just then a question of preparation and information. Did they not know? Right? Like,
yeah.
How does this happen? That's one of those big questions.
Yeah, I think that okay, let me ask you this, and just briefly. You would favor nuclear power in the U.S., is that right?
I'm on the fence for it.
Really? Okay, we should talk about this sometime.
We should. Yeah. The issue is just with the disposal of the waste, right? That we don't have a really good plan for dealing with nuclear waste from the existing power, because the half-life is just so long. So they have to figure out where to put it. And that's been an ongoing debate forever, right? In a mountain, do they bury it under the desert? What do they do? Right? And so I need to be more specific. I am in favor of its use for things like the aircraft carriers and the submarines, right?
Sure.
Because the ocean is vast and you need something that allows you to keep going. And so that's an acceptable risk and trade-off for national security. It's for civilian use where it gets a little complicated, because if you've studied the history of Chernobyl, that's an ongoing problem, right? They had to seal it with a giant concrete thing, but it's still there. It's still a problem, and there's no easy answer. There's no easy solution to the issue of what happens when things go really bad. And so I'm in favor of it if they can get a handle on that, if they can actually figure out a way to not have that happen. But if that happens, it can go really bad. And so
Yeah, it can.
that's where I'm on the fence.
Exactly, and being on the fence, I think, is a sensible thing to do and shows a degree of. The word I'm searching for is empathy, but that's not exactly it. I don't know the word. Shows a degree of something. Good.
At its most basic, you look at options in light of their alternatives, and on this
Exactly.
one, I think there are better alternatives. So I think hydro, I think thermal, geothermal, solar, that wave technology, all those are a little bit better options because the downside risks are lower. Like the upside potential for nuclear is that you can get a lot of energy cheaply in the long run, but the downside
Yes.
is catastrophic environmental harms that lead to devastation for generations. It's just a question of alternatives. Are there meaningful alternatives? I think there are.
I think that cautious adoption of nuclear power is the best, is a good idea given the alternatives, given our need for electricity, its cost, the fact that the pollution is in small amounts, and the safety, we have safety technology currently, and I do think that on a large scale we can reliably count on the technology and we can build the reactors in such a way that they can shut themselves down if problems arise. And that doesn't hurt anybody, and that's just a great thing to do. But I, too, would put it as a conditional acceptance. Yeah.
It could also just be that I'm a little bit biased against nuclear in particular because I just consume a steady diet of shows that show just like massive failure of nuclear energy. So if you've ever seen the movie K-19, Widowmaker, a nuclear submarine fails and they have to scuttle it, or the Chernobyl show where they showed like step by step just how bad it got and how many failures there were along the lines. It's just a question of, look, societies succeed until they don't, right? And something like nuclear power is one of those things that needs a constant maintenance and regulation and oversight.
Constant stream of competency, you might call it.
Absolutely. And look, things go bad. Okay. So if you've got a technology that if it goes bad for any period of time and then it gets really bad, if society just for whatever reason stops working for a little while, I don't know, a giant earthquake that causes your nuclear power plant right next to the ocean to start leaking into the ocean forever. I'm talking about the thing in Japan. How they even responded to that was just the Fukushima Daiichi. There you go. That was what it's called. I watched a movie about how they enlisted old people to go in for an hour to try.
I remember that.
And people volunteered to try and address it, but it's like, is that where we want to be as a society anywhere in the world, that you have to enlist people to trade years of their lives for a few hours of trying to address something? Like, that's, if there's a way to get energy or technology that doesn't require those extreme levels of risk, maybe use those technologies. I like solar. I like solar's great because the sun just gives and gives, right? You don't worry about solar until the sun gives out. And by that point, we've got a different problem, right? We know the sun's going to go away eventually.
It's on the calendar.
The distant future, right?
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where you look at the benefits and the risks, and even if it's a 1% risk of failure for something like nuclear, the costs are just so extreme, right? That's the issue I have. And that the cost for some of these other technologies, not so bad. I don't know why Trump is so opposed to solar or wind, where he's like, oh, the birds and all that other stuff, so that he'll spend billions of dollars so people don't build projects. What is that? What's going on there? I have an inkling of a suspicion that it might not have to do with the actual technology, but actually has to do with money that the various groups involved. Why are they shutting down a bridge between Detroit and Canada? I wonder what that's about. And if you dig deeper into that issue, it's, a person who stood to lose a lot of money may have allegedly contributed a bunch of money to the Trump political machine, got a meeting, was like, one ask, shut down the, it's like, oh, okay.
I wonder how much somebody would have to pay certain members of the executive, let's say, in order to get a month renamed after him. That would just be something else.
I honestly don't know. But it's one of those things where you hope that the people with the power like act ethically, responsibly, that act in a manner that will result in good outcomes for people and safety for a generation. But that's not always the case. Watch Chernobyl, right? They were much more concerned about like hiding it up until the issue got so great where they're like half of Europe's going to be covered in a radioactive cloud that will make it so they can't grow stuff for the next 500 years or whatever it was. There was that one scene where they're like, everybody's going to suffer and you will be hated forever. And it was like,
right. Yeah. I think that all of those points of caution are warranted and a good thing to have going in the back of your mind. And then you consider, for now at least, that we still got massive oil, we still got, I don't know, are we phasing down the coal? We are probably. But considering the alternatives, but I think that all of your cautions are in order, yeah.
The point I'm trying to make in a roundabout way, I'll make it more succinctly. In the last century, there were two major world wars, the effects of which are still being felt. There's still a zone in France that can never be lived in because it's just barraged with chemicals and the land's virtually...
Is it the Verdun area? Or...
I'm thinking of where the trench warfare happened, the Somme. There's an area...
Or the Somme,
There is an area I know of in the world where people just can't really live there because it's just deluged with chemicals and various other things that happened after World War One, and then after World War Two, right? There were certain parts of the infrastructure and the world that are virtually unlivable. You can't live there. You can't. Mm-hmm. So the concern there, as always, is that I'm not saying war is inevitable, but I'm saying that the likelihood of another major world war on that scale is
not zero.
Possible, right? It's a non-zero possibility, and to the extent that exists, it's a really bad idea to have sources of energy that could be hit and lead to catastrophic system failure, right? Because as we've seen with the Ukraine war and this war with Iran, it's a trust, like it's an honor system. You just hope that the belligerents in the conflict won't wreak absolute havoc on everything and all the infrastructure and destroy it. Like, you hope that they won't do it, but carrying the future on the hope of something not happening, that's a more risky proposition than just making energy that doesn't carry huge catastrophic system failure risk. That's just my thought on that, right? Like,
yeah, totally. And that's a good point, too, in terms of not knowing what the future is going to look like. Like, they didn't know in 1930 what the 1940s were going to be. And likewise, we don't know what the 2030s or the 2040s are going to be. But now, if I could be imprecise here, but just try to describe my own mind state, because Chernobyl is one of my favorite shows, and it speaks to good cautions. If for me in particular, nuclear energy is effective enough that I'm willing to say, okay, for now, fine. But I'll just call that, like, the hippie side of my mind, saying, nah, man, we want to live in a world where we don't have to worry about all this crap, man. And to me, natural gas just happens to fall in a very little kind of thing. It's like, that stuff explodes, man. You don't want explosives going into your house, man. You want love going into your house. And I can caricature it, but it just kind of, these people had so now for our viewers, I'm back on the Ohio houses exploding. And so, to me, the two kind of occupy similar cost benefit, and even though the detriment may be much less for the gas, it just seems kind of random to me, and nuclear is better anyway, is the idea. That's my thinking. Go ahead.
So let me just interject briefly. So, yes, those problems are bad, right? They're limited duration events that can be contained, okay? The issue I have with nuclear power is that when things go bad, they go really bad, and that it takes hundreds of years to deal with the issue, the fallout of it, right? That it's not just that it goes bad, it goes, like, irrevocably bad. Not impossible to deal with.
But over the course of centuries, yeah.
The requirements to address it require just a huge amount of societal investment that isn't guaranteed at all, right? So, like, a gas explosion sucks, obviously. Fires are terrible, right? But you can rebuild. You can rebuild over the exact same location, just remove the gas, right? That happens. The history of humanity is bad things happen, you rebuild, right? Volcanic explosions, you rebuild. Earthquakes, you rebuild. The problem with nuclear radiation is like every location where these terrible things have happened, nobody's living there. Nobody's living in Chernobyl, right? Nobody's living in Fukushima Daiichi at the nuclear reactor. They're not there. Like nobody can live there, period, for who knows how long. And so that's one of those things where like you can't just rebuild. You can't just pave over the Chernobyl. Like it's there. No one's ever going to live there until it gets fixed, and who knows when that will be, because it's one of those things where like the technology to use the energy exists, but the technology to clean it up isn't as good now. Like
Yeah.
maybe there's a scenario in the future, maybe that we'll figure out how to get a better handle on this. Maybe there's aliens out there that know how to deal with this better. We're not there yet, right? And so that's one of those things where it's not an ideal situation to think of like bad things happening in terms of millennia or centuries as opposed to just like fixing it within months. It's one of those
Mhm.
things. It could
Sure.
and look, if they could figure out a way to make nuclear power with no downside risk, that'd be awesome, right? That'd be great. But there's also circumstances, obviously, and I listed them, where like there are acceptable trade-offs and risks that we make. That for national security reasons or deterrence, it's better to have the aircraft carriers than to not have the aircraft carriers. And the best way to have the aircraft carriers is that they're able to stay on the ocean for huge amounts of time. And the only way to get there is through nuclear power, right? Because it's a constant, effective means of energy in that circumstance, but not in a fixed location, not if there are better alternatives. That's just my argument. I could be wrong. Maybe the benefits do outweigh the risks, but I that's just like my own personal opinion here of that the damage is so great and so profound, and societies just haven't figured out a good way to deal with it, right? To move on from it.
Yeah.
Fukushima's still ongoing, right? Like they're still dealing with it. It's still leaking into the ocean. It hasn't been stopped. It's only a problem in the sense that it's still going into the ocean.
It seems like a big problem. Big ocean, big problem.
It's more a question of there's still unknown effects in terms of cancer, right? Of cancer rates from eating seafood that we don't
Mhm.
know the extent. Because remember, radiation lingers in things, and so who knows how long it's going to accumulate. But this is one of
Mhm.
those things it's an ongoing problem, right? It's a kind of Pandora's box, right? So if you look at the history of nuclear testing, for instance, and people who were downwind, higher rates of cancer, right? Like they got sicker than the general
Yep.
population. And so it's just one of those things is how much is too much for if these catastrophic events happen. Because it's not an isolated event, right? It's not just one nuclear power plant that's failed. There's a handful of them. There's Chernobyl, there's Fukushima Daiichi, there was the 3 Miles incident. Like it's a handful, right? It's not
Right.
just one. So that's just all one of those ongoing questions. Anyways, I could go on and on about this particular subject that there are better options that don't involve so much risk. I guess the last thing I would say is keep better records of where the pipelines are, right? So that you don't ever cut into them, right? Like this was 100% preventable for what happened in Ohio. It shouldn't have happened. There should have been no circumstance where a crew is able to cut into a gas line and then an explosion of this nature happens. These are things that are 100% preventable, right? Because in order to even put those lines in, to even do the work, they had to get approval, regulations, oversight. So there was some process issue that happened here that a mistake of this nature happened. It didn't have to happen. It's 100% preventable, right? There's no surprise here. That is what I'm saying. Like the
Right.
government knows where everything is because they have to know where everything is because they put it there, right? It's not some like mystery. There's no mystery here. That would be my last word on that, is that this one was different than what happened in Whidbey Island. Like it wasn't some unusual weird sequence of events where like a cigarette and a bunch of fireworks go kaboom. No, this was a known thing, but a gas pipeline that should not have been cut into, period. Shouldn't have happened, right? And we've talked about that. Everybody needs to just be talking to each other so there's no mystery here. Like, also, this is one of those things where, like, was there urgent? Were they in a rush? Was there urgency? What was going on that they didn't take the time to just get like a huge layout of every single thing that's there So that doesn't happen. I don't know how these things happen, honestly, because they shouldn't. There shouldn't be a circumstance where these things happen. All the information's there. It's all public record. It has to be. I don't see a sort unless they were working on private property or something. But even then, I don't. There's no way, right? There's no way like a private mansion or a private house has their own private gas line. There's no way, right? This is one of those things that's like super, super highly regulated. There's no way.
Mondays with Mike.